Hi everyone, welcome to day one of the Bahama Bottom Sew Along for Sonia Estep Designs. Today we are going to talk a little bit about fabric choices, we are going to talk about fit, and we are going to talk about the things you need to make sure you have on hand before you get started sewing this pattern. So let's move into fabric selection. The Bahama Bottoms were designed to be made with woven fabric. They can be made with knits, but for the purposes of this sew along, we're going to talk about woven fabric. I'm going to demonstrate everything with woven fabric. Woven fabric has a special consideration in that the raw edges need to be finished. So if you want to use knit for your Bahama Bottoms, you don't have to worry about those extra steps of finishing your edges, but I'm going to show everyone how to properly finish their edges for the woven fabric that the pattern was designed for. You have a lot of options when it comes to woven fabric, but you want to make sure you're using something with good drape. One of the questions we get a lot is, can I use quilting cotton? Now, I'm not going to say you can't use quilting cotton. I believe we have some members in our Facebook group who have successfully used quilting cotton. But I will say the way the pattern was designed to drape, and I'm going to hold up a pair of finished Bahama Bottoms here, it's gathered at the waist. It's meant to have a really nice hang and some good drape to it. So quilting cotton probably wouldn't be my first choice. That's not to say you can't use it. It's just to say there are a lot of other really, really great options that I would recommend instead. So I'm going to show you some of my favorite fabrics. This right here is a rayon challis. It's wonderfully lightweight. It's wonderfully breathable. I wear these around outside in the Virginia summer, 100 degrees. It feels like I have on shorts. Amazing. I love rayon challis. And when I asked you guys to select what fabric I was going to use for the sew along, in the Facebook group, you guys selected this beautiful rayon challis right here. So you can see when this is gathered together, it just hangs very nicely. It's very lightweight. It's very easy to sew with. The other really nice thing about this fabric is it takes a crease really well. When you're sewing with wovens, ironing is a critical step. I will probably do more ironing in this sew along than I will do sewing. So what was the fabric I tried? It was like a crepe, like a polyester crepe, and it just would not hold a crease, which made it a little bit more difficult to sew with. Not impossible, but especially if you're new to sewing wovens, I highly recommend a fabric that will crease really well when you press it. So this is the fabric we're going to be using. But real quick, let me just show you some other fabrics I really like for the Bahama Bottoms. This is a double gauze. Double because it's actually two layers. You can see it's flat on one side and solid on the other. It is also really, really lightweight, really breathable. And when it's gathered up, it has a really, really nice drape. This is just straight, this is 100% linen. It's a little more structured. It has a little more shape to it. You can tell it doesn't drape. It doesn't have as much drape as the rayon challis or the double gauze, but it still does hang nicely. It doesn't like stand up on its own. This is a seersucker, another amazing fabric for summer. Very breathable, very lightweight. It has a little bit of a texture to it. I think most people are familiar with seersucker. And it will also gather and drape very nicely. Now this is a chambray. Most people, when they think of chambray, they think of this type of material for, say, a man's work shirt. But this material, also very lightweight, great for summer or warmer weather. Wonderful drape, great for the Bahama Bottoms. And finally, we have this fabric here. This fabric's interesting. It is a crinkle woven. And I don't know if you can tell from that far away. You probably cannot. It is actually crinkled. And so what that means is when you pull it, the crinkles come out and it has a little bit of stretch to it. That makes it wonderfully forgiving to sew with, especially if you're between sizes. It's almost like a woven fabric with some stretch properties to it. The tricky thing about sewing with a crinkle woven is you want to make sure when you're starting out, you're not ironing all the crinkles out. Because if you iron all the crinkles out and then you cut your size, as soon as you wash it, those crinkles are going to shrink back up. So if you are using any sort of woven fabric that has the crinkles or the wrinkles, make sure that you wash it and dry it and maybe steam it before you cut it, but you want to be careful not to iron it so it's that big when you cut it, because then when you wash it, you're going to be disappointed. It's going to be too small. I learned that the hard way. So those are just a few suggestions for the different types of woven fabric you can use. Feel free to ask in our Facebook group or in the comments down below if you have a different fabric you were thinking about using. We would be happy to let you know if it'll work for this pattern or not. Okay, so let's talk about fit. Fit for the Bahama bottoms is pretty straightforward. The pattern is meant to be a loose fitting drapey pattern, and it has some ease built in. So I have the size chart in front of me. I will also put it up on the screen. If you have your tutorial in front of you, it is on page 4. You can see at the top is the size chart, but then down below are the finished measurements. And so if you're wondering how much ease is built into the pattern, if you're between sizes for your hip or your waist, you can always check the finished measurements and see exactly how much ease you're going to have depending on what size you pick. You want to lead with your hip size, and on our size chart, the hip size you see, or any measurement you see, is the largest measurement for a particular size. So if you are right above a number, you want to size up. That being said, again, look at the finished measurements below. One of the things you will notice for finished measurements is the waist seems huge. The waist is not actually huge because there's a step where you're going to cut your elastic and you're going to shrink the waist back in. But the finished measurement for the waist is actually quite large. You can see in a lot of cases, it's almost as large as the hip. It's a straight cut pattern piece that gets cinched in and gathered with the elastic. So that doesn't mean you don't have to grade for your waist. I would still encourage you, if your waist is dramatically different than your hip, to grade. You want to make sure that your pattern does have the pretty gathers that it's intended to have on the waist. But if it's just a size, or if you're on the cusp of a size, there is a lot of ease in the waist, so the pattern will be forgiving if you have a little bit of flexibility for grading for your waist. Okay, now let's talk about the things you will need to complete this pattern other than your fabric once you've selected that. You will need elastic for your waist. There is some flexibility with what size elastic you're using. I'm using the largest size elastic recommended in the pattern. I'm using 1.5 inch. And the reason I like 1.5 inches is because that gives me enough space to sew my 3 bands basically, and still have room for a drawstring to go in the middle. I like the larger waistband. You absolutely do not have to use 1.5 inch elastic, but it's my preference for the look for these pants. A little bit of interfacing, just a little bit. Because lightweight woven fabric can be very drapey, these pocket openings right here can sometimes sag. They're cut on the bias so they can stretch a little. You're just going to want to use a little bit of interfacing right here if you're doing front pockets. So elastic and interfacing. And other than that, just what you need for normal sewing projects. Seam gauge, very handy. We're going to be very, very precise when we're measuring our seam allowances here. Scissors, clips, pins, your soft tape to determine your size if you haven't already done that. And of course, an iron and ironing board and a sewing machine. So let's get started. Okay, you have some homework for day 1. Your homework for day 1 is to cut your pattern. The Bahama bottoms come in multiple different formats. I will put a link in the description below to a YouTube tutorial explaining our different formats so you can figure out which one might work for you if you have not already printed your pattern. I actually use a projector format. I just project my pattern from the ceiling to my cutting mat so I don't have to print or tape anything. But you are going to cut out your pattern today and we will come back tomorrow. Tomorrow, day 2, we will be covering pockets. Front pockets, back pockets, pocket flaps, everything pockets. If you've decided you're going to do a version without pockets, you can skip day 2 and join us on day 3, but come back tomorrow and be ready if you're doing your pockets.